So I don't have a clicker, so unfortunately I'm going to have to stand over here in order to click. So I'm here to talk to you today about SchemaPuker and how you can go from a data model to a diagram. Hey, don't do that. In 5 minutes. I guess it's going to try and auto open it. Anyway, I am a lead developer at BrightGen. I've been working with the Salesforce platform since about 2008. I started off as an admin for an end user, learned how to code in Apex, and eventually joined a consultancy about 3 years ago, and here I am in London at BrightGen. I'm originally from Australia. I moved out here about 2 years ago. So, what do I mean by a diagram? What am I talking about here? I'm talking about entity relationship diagrams. There's an example of one there. It's a fairly standardized way to do a graphical representation of your data model. So see your objects, see your fields, things like that. When I say entity, in the Salesforce world, that means object. So why do I want one? Having documentation of your system is awesome. It's something you can provide to stakeholders. It's something that you can reference yourself later on. Maybe you built something and you go to look back in a few years' time or a few months' time and what was that I actually built? I'm sure we've all been there. You can include it if you're a consultant. Sometimes you need to include in proposals things that you plan to build, things that you plan to deliver to your customers, or even an explanation of what they've already got. And as they say, a picture is worth 1,000 words. It can help you to understand what you've got. So it sounds like an easy enough problem, but unfortunately in the Salesforce world, it's not. So if you want to build an entity relationship diagram, at the moment it's a manual process. There's no way to just go into Salesforce and go export ERD. There is a tool that some of you have may seen called Schema Builder, which allows you to view and make changes to your Salesforce schema. But unfortunately you can't export from that. And you can't make changes to it without affecting your actual data model. So you could take a screen dump and put that in, but that's not particularly nice. So there's no easy way to include what you've got, your current schema, in any documents. You'd have to build it in a tool like Lucid or Visio and then put it into a document that way, and that's all manual. That's about it as well. So what exactly is SchemaPuker? So what it does, it creates a Postgres SQL schema of your Salesforce data. Now, that's useful because you can import that into a charting tool like Lucid Chart or Visio. I prefer to use Lucid Chart, and that's what I'll be demonstrating here. So it doesn't store any data, it doesn't do anything to your data model. All it does is basically read the metadata from Salesforce and export it to Postgres schema. So why did I even bother making this? Well, something I was doing a lot, especially when I first started in the consulting world, was doing these ERDs. Every single time it was a manual process, and that was quite annoying. It also was a good excuse to learn to do something new. So before this, I'd never built a Java web app. I'd done console apps and desktop apps, but I'd never built a web app, so it was a good excuse to learn a new thing. And of course, it's something that, it's a way to give back to the Salesforce Ohana. The original idea for SchemaPuker came from a colleague of mine named David Everett. He had built a sort of early version of this using Apex and Visualforce. So it did a similar thing, but natively on Salesforce. As you can understand, there's a few limitations with that. First of all, if you're looking at a new customer's org, you'd have to copy this code into their org, into a sandbox, and run it. They may not want you to do that. They may not want you to modify their org. You need to have a sandbox or a developer org that matches production because there were no unit tests or anything like that. So it wasn't an ideal solution, but it was a brilliant idea. So I thought I could make a version of this that doesn't require modifying it all. So I built a console version. I built a desktop version using Swing, if anyone's familiar with that in the Java world. It wasn't pretty, but it worked. And then finally, I built the web app version that we see today. So yeah, the name. I was speaking to Dave Carroll at Salesforce in 2016. So Salesforce is a community conference that I co-organise, and if you don't know anything about it, please come and talk to me later. So Dave Carroll is a developer evangelist at Salesforce, and he suggested that the name I had, Salesforce ERD tool, is a bit boring. So he said, well, why don't you call it SchemaPuker? So, all right, that'll do. That's a good name, so that's stuck. So enough going on about it. Let's actually see this thing in action. I can try. So we go to SchemaPuker.heroku.com. We're presented with a very simple screen asking us to log in. So I'm going to log into my developer org, so that would be production. It also supports sandboxes. So I'm going to hit login. That's going to use OAuth to log into Salesforce and return me to SchemaPuker, same as you would with any other OAuth app such as Workbench. So here I'm going to see a list of objects. So you can see account with account in brackets. You can see, say, campaign member with campaign member next to each other in brackets. The name in brackets is obviously the API name of the particular object. So if I choose account and I choose contact, you can see the objects populate down in the bottom here. So I can manually add an object if I like. So, it's actually opportunities, not opportunities. Right. So you need to put the API names down here, not the friendly names. I can choose whether I want to show only the relationships between these objects, or whether I want to show all the fields. As you can understand, if you've got a complex data model with a lot of fields per object, you might clutter up your ERD. So maybe you only want to see the relationships between the objects. That's what I'm going to choose here. Hit submit, and SchemaPuker is going to think about this for a minute and come back with our Postgres SQL schema output. So you can do a couple of things with this. You can copy it and paste it. This is just a big text box. Or you can download it if you want to export several things or do it later. So now I'm going to go into Lucidchart. I've already logged in here and create a new document. You can use other tools like Visio and ERWin, but as I say, Lucidchart's my preferred tool here. And you click on the Shapes toolbox and add the entity relationship and hit save. Now I can simply import my schema. So, oh, they've changed this, that's fun. So, paste the out, it used to be two text boxes beneath each other. So let's hope this still works. So press import. Oh, goody.
On the last screen you could pick Postgres from the options at the top.
Yes, I might have chosen the wrong thing. That's really good. Next. I love that they've literally changed this in the last week and broken my tool. That's brilliant that I found out today. So I can at least fix it before DreamForce. Here's one that I prepared earlier. Luckily enough, I've got one. This is of the Salesforce content entity relationship. If you've ever done anything with Salesforce content, you know it's a pain compared to the standard attachments. So you can see these objects here. I can drag additional objects on, such as content folder, which I think is already on there. You can see how it creates the relationships between things, and I can also create new relationships if I so desire. I can add new objects as well. If I scroll down, I can add a new object on here and relate it to another one. Obviously, doing this doesn't change my Salesforce data model, but it does allow me to document changes that I want to make. So, that was fantastic that we found out that it's broken in front of a large group of people. And we went to play from start. We don't want that. Play from current slide. Skip, sorry. This is why we do a dry run before we go to DreamForce. So, how did I build it? I mentioned that it was written in Java. I'm using fairly standard things here, so I'm using Maven for dependency management, using Spring Boot for the bootstrapping. The Force.com WSC, which is a really useful thing if you plan to develop develop apps in Java that use Salesforce APIs. It wraps the Metadata API, the regular SOAP API for accessing data, things like that. Makes it very easy to use. I'm using a library called Scribe for OAuth 2, which makes doing OAuth very, very quick and easy. Spring MVC and Timely for the UI, and GitHub and Heroku pipelines for basic continuous integration. Obviously, the whole app is hosted on Heroku. So, if you've never done anything with OAuth 2, or if you have, you can know that it can be a bit of a pain. Unfortunately, there's no really easy ways to do it unless you find a nice library like Scribe. But OAuth 2 is great. It lets you authenticate in a standard way. SchemaPuker never actually sees your username and password. You're logging into Salesforce, not SchemaPuker. And it is simply providing SchemaPuker with a token, which then SchemaPuker can use to make requests. So if you change your password, if you log out of Salesforce, once you close the SchemaPuker window, it no longer has access to the Metadata API or your Salesforce org. So once I've logged in to Salesforce and got this token, you can use the force.com WSC to get metadata. So it's built using the partner WSDL, so it can access any Salesforce org. Obviously, there's two WSDLs in Salesforce, Partner and Enterprise. And it makes accessing the SOAP APIs incredibly easy. So I'm using the Metadata API in this case. Once I've got the metadata, I simply loop through it to build our Postgres SQL schema, which I'm now going to have to change that, obviously. So to make it pretty, or to make it usable at least, I'm using the Lightning design system. So if you've seen Lightning apps before, you've probably seen the buttons and drop-downs and things like that I'm using. So the Lightning design system, despite being used in Salesforce for Lightning, it's also a standard CSS library that you can include in your own application. Something to be aware of, though, that there is no content delivery network for it yet, so you will need to download it and reference it in your app. Unlike things like Bootstrap, where you can just reference a CDN. So something to be aware of, versioning and things like that. If it changes, your app will not change, which could be a good or a bad thing. So now we need to put it all in the cloud. So I'm using Heroku, as I've mentioned, to run it. It's quick, it's easy, it's cheap. The only reason I actually have to pay to run SchemaPuker is because I need SSL to access Salesforce. Heroku does offer free dynos that you can use, so that's nice. And to pay for it, but to have SSL, it's like $7 US a month. It's very cheap. So I'm using a tool that's only recent in Heroku called Heroku Pipelines to do basic continuous integration. So on my GitHub repo that I have SchemaPuker living in, I have two branches, master and develop. And every time I push a change to develop, it pushes the code up to the develop instance of SchemaPuker. Every time I push a change to a master, it pushes the production version of SchemaPuker to the production instance on Heroku. So it's very, very basic and simple continuous integration. You can do a lot more with Heroku pipelines, but that's all I'm doing for now. Just more of an experiment than anything else. So what have we learned? So it allows you to generate Postgres SQL schema for the import into charting tools. And from there, you can do anything with those. You can extend them, you can put them into documents. Anything that your charting tool of choice can do, you can do with these outputs. And you can build things like this. This wasn't super difficult to build. It's easy to, if you want to have a go, to make things that could potentially be useful to yourself and others. You don't need to code in Java. You can code in Node or Python or Ruby. Heroku supports quite a few different languages. And that's how you get it. It's at SchemaPuker.com or SchemaPuker.HerokuApp.com. Obviously, I need to fix it, so maybe don't use it just yet, or use it with a different tool aside from Lucidchart, since they've changed their import. And thank you. If you want any further information, there's a list of resources and links and things that I've used that I put up on my website. So you can either go to mickwheels.net/dreamforce or scan that QR code.